Okay, hey guys, welcome back to Murder by Design. Tonight is a pretty exciting episode here. As you can see, I am all alone, but I have a couple of guests that are joining with me. Colleen is not here with me tonight. She had a medical emergency. So stepping in tonight as a co-host is our friend Brandy. And she won't be on camera tonight, but she is here. So say hi to everybody, Brandy.
Hey guys, I'm here. If my sound is too wonky, just say something in comments.
And then tonight, though, we're going to have a very special guest. We're going to do this, and we're so excited to have him. He's been on the show a couple of times. We haven't got to see him yet, but now you get to see his lovely face. So we'll be talking tonight with Kirk Nurmi, who, if you guys don't know who that is, he was Jodi Arias's former defense attorney. He worked death penalty defense attorney in Arizona and California, I believe. Arizona and California, I believe. And so we're going to have him on tonight. And tonight we will be talking about the Golden State Killer case. So welcome, Kirk. How are you?
Hi, Francie. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So tonight, so everybody kind of can meet you again, because now we get to actually see you talking about yourself. So tell everybody a little bit about your history as an attorney and all of that.
Sure. I'll have to correct you a little bit in doing that. I practiced solely in Arizona throughout my entire career. And that career began in 2001. I graduated from the University of Wyoming in 2000, came down here, took the bar, sworn in, all that jazz, and started my work as a public defender. And I started my work and my career as a public defender mainly because I believed in the constitutional right. So it's meant a lot to me. And I believe that people accused of a crime, were worthy of a valid and vigorous defense, because that's what our Constitution dictates. That's what I think. We have the greatest judicial system in the world, and that's what that system requires of defense attorneys. So I was what you might call a regular old public defender. Deputy public defender was the formal name for about 7 years. I had thoughts about going into private practice, but there was a opening in the death penalty unit. And as we talked, I believe, in the last episode, I have a personal objection to the death penalty. So I thought I would put that to use because, it meant less course appearances, less clients, all those sort of things. And not belaboring the point too much, but that's what led me to be assigned while I was a public defender to serve as the lead counsel for Jodi Arias. And then we all pretty much know what happened from there. As Brandy laughs.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite cases, in all honesty. That case is extremely fascinating.
Yes, it is. It's an interesting case. I don't think, it's funny because I'm sorry, I'm being attacked by my dog. He hardly ever comes on, but that's Rowdy, guys.
Too. He looks vicious.
Oh, I know. Isn't he vicious? He's just vicious. And I've been gone all day, so he is like, play with me, mommy, play with me. So, but anyway, that's one case I didn't follow right as it was happening. I think it was me. I just didn't really get into it. It's really funny because her boyfriend is from my hometown of Riverside, so which is really interesting. But I just think that's it. That's a crazy story that I didn't follow, and I should have really followed it when it was happening, since it kind of had like a hometown connection. But I didn't really get into it. I've read a lot about it. I've watched a bunch of documentaries on it, and I'm just very excited to get your book, Trapped with Jodi Arias. So
she's a very interesting character. She is just she's interesting.
So but tonight we're going to be talking about the Golden State Killer case, which is one that Brandy really has gotten into. I've been following it for a long time. Forgive me, though. It's been a little while since I've had a refresher course on this specific case. So if I get something wrong, please just let me know, guys. But I'm trying real hard to get all the facts straight with this one. But Kirk, now, have you been following it since it's been breaking in 2018, or did you kind of know a little bit about it before that, or how did you come involved with following it?
Well, probably like everyone, just noting it in the news and understanding the carnage. I actually had the opportunity. I was down at the book fair. I'm friends with Shanna Hogan, the Tucson Book Festival, actually. So I was down there to support her, and Billy Jensen was at the signing, and he had written a book and talked about a little bit about the tracking. So that was probably my immersion into it, aside from, kind of looking at the videos, and obviously the plea agreement that came out, I don't know, a week or two ago now.
Good Lord.
Resolved the case, and really kind of, then when you really look at it, to me, when you saw the plea and all the charges and everything, you really get a sense of the depth of the evil actions, and how this man was right up there with the worst of the worst, the Ted Bundy's world, per se.
Right. And have you ever, I mean, for me, it was shocking to see 74 counts that he is pleading to. Have you ever seen something like that in depth or intense in your career?
In terms of the quantity, no. Certainly there have been people that have committed more than one rapes, and I haven't, fortunately, have been tasked ever with representing a quote unquote serial killer, right?
Right.
And the most I've dealt with people that have killed one or two people out of the same incident, right? So it's a little different than the pattern you're talking here. So yeah,
this very shocking.
I think this is something, like I say, this is something in the stratosphere, as it were, not in terms of popularity, but in terms of the horror and the evil and the amount of years.
The length of time in this case is crazy.
That's what I was about to say. It's the expansion of time that this took place, and how long it took for the crimes to get resolved is also, like I say, it's mind-boggling.
I don't know. Do you think that there's more that he may not have been charged with? Ty, our friend Ty was asking. I personally do. What do you feel?
Do too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly always possible when there can't be like a link made. Maybe there was an unsolved rape, but they can't necessarily tie it to him. You look at Brandy probably follows this way closer than I did, but even when he was brought to justice, there were still like victims that had passed away and things of that nature. So maybe correlations couldn't be drawn there, and justice wasn't served in that regard.
So it went from 1973 to 1986. He did both, Northern and Southern California. Obviously started in Northern California, merged down to, getting down into the Southern California. And he's thought to have done over 50 home invasion rapes, 13 murders, and nearly 250 burglaries, which I don't think he was charged on any of the burglaries. I think all 74 counts were in between the
the rapes and the murders.
The rapes and the murders. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to read comments too. I'm trying to read comments and think and talk and ask questions and do all that. So I'm trying.
And I don't have my notes with me, so I'm just like kind of trying to rack my brain to make sure I have everything straight, because I'm not at home at the moment.
I don't remember. Do you know Kirk or Brandy? Either one of you? I know he was a police officer at one point in time. Was he a police officer while he was committing some of these crimes, or
robberies,
was that at a different time? So the robberies, but not during the rapes.
I believe in the very, very beginning, there were some robberies that they have tried to link back to him. And then his badge was found that one time. Why his badge was never taken from him, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that I do believe that he was asked to resign.
Yeah, he was actually, my understanding is that he shoplifted, and after 6 years, that was the reason for his resignation / termination from the police force. Right.
And so that was before he started doing these rapes, murders. Do you think that had anything to play into it? Like, do you think it was an anger, aggression thing at that point, and maybe that like, I'll show you kind of thing, and it kind of morphed from there? Or do you think it's just an evil dude that was lying in wait to get there?
Oh boy, that's a question to which there will be no definitive answer, but you're certainly right. there's a lot of anger, hate, right? And when I look at these things, I try to look beyond the anger and hate, because I try to look at the reasons, because I think if we look at the reasons, then we can start maybe looking at preventing crimes like this down the road.
Right.
And one of the interesting things, now, whether it was true or not, because it came out of his mouth, is he talked about, watching his sister getting raped, and she was 7, and I believe he was 9 or 10. I think that's certainly one place we can look where psychological scars and pain are kind of conflating with sexual behavior, even though it's sexual violence and not true sexual behavior, if you will. That conflation might have been a point where those type of things began with this killer. And I think we see a lot of that, perhaps even with people like Ted Bundy and that merger of sex and violence that can be correlated to somewhere back in their childhood. Now, I don't think we have that with Ted Bundy, but we certainly have the Golden State Killer making these proclamations anyway, indirectly.
Right. And what do you make of him claiming that there was, this guy Jerry, who he didn't want to do this, but Jerry wanted to do it inside of him, and then Jerry went on his way, and that's how he was able to, stop doing this for so long. What do you make of that? Like him claiming that?
Well, it's hard to say. It could be just a completely false claim. You have to consider the source, right? It could be a way for him to defer guilt, but also, and not accept full responsibility, I guess. But, we also have to look at these things in a different way. We can criticize and say that's BS, but Ted Bundy said very similar things. So what, pray tell, is motivating this kind of angry persona in there? Because we see people that, like this, Ted Bundy was in law school. This guy was a cop. He was a Vietnam vet, right? So you would have saw him at that age before you knew he committed those things, and you would have considered him to be an admirable person, right? So what motivated this split? To me, that's where the fascination lies. And psychology is such that you'll never know definitively whether he's lying or not, right? Whether Ted Bundy was lying or not with some of these things. But I think it's a great avenue for exploration when we talk about psychology and prevention of crimes and tracking of crimes like this in the future.
Right. Right. And we've dealt with this, Brandy, Colleen, and Christina, and I, and the team, we dealt with this kind of alternate ego when we were looking into the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case with Nicholas Godejohn. I mean, he claimed that there were like several, personalities with inside of him, including one of them to be a 500-year-old vampire, you can chalk it up to, oh, well, they're just making these things up, which I think in some ways, maybe it's something that they are creating. I don't think that any of these that have claimed that they had like, am I going wonky? Do you guys hear me weird?
No, I hear you.
No, Brandy, I think there's reverb from you, Brandy. Or do you have your headphones in or no?
No.
That's what's happening. I'm echoing back. Okay, I'm not anymore. That was weird.
Yep, we're good.
It was strange.
Didn't do nothing.
I don't know.
I'll let it alone.
No, I don't think, like I was saying, Ty, I don't think that the DID, I do believe DID exists, dissociative identity disorder. I do believe there is a case for it existing, but I think that all too often they, I think it's a way for them to kind of like Kirk said, is not take the responsibility for something that maybe they don't understand themselves, because
a lot of times I think that it's the way they compartmentalize the evil crap that they're doing, because it's hard to live with yourself when you do these evil things, but then you can't stop yourself from doing the evil things. So it's kind of like you compartmentalize the evil dude to the nice dude,
Right. They're very, it's what was the word I'm thinking of here? I'm thinking not compartmentalized, but definitely I assume it's and it's a very obsessive thing, like they can't stop, most of them at least, there is an urge there that that's like an itch that they just can't scratch, and they try, but it just keeps happening, right? So Kirk, have you dealt with anything like that with maybe a case that was similar in nature with maybe a claim of something like that, of an alternate, or have you seen them in other cases that you've worked on?
I have not. I mean, that's a very, again, and that's very rare for someone. Like I say, the people that are going to be in that category are probably going to be people that have racked up the sad kind of tragic numbers that we see in this case, or a case like Ted Bundy's, because that's where that compulsion is. That's where it would be in a case like that, when you're talking about a killing of random strangers and then being aroused at some level or interested in some level by their fear. Because keep in mind, this guy isn't just doing these crimes. He's calling his victims back, saying, I'm going to kill you, breathing heavy, things of that nature. So yeah, that is truly, and I'm happy to say I had my hands full enough, and I'm happy that I never came across anything like that.
Sure, exactly. You know, and that's, it's just an interesting thing. He racked up so much, and this is one of the ones I think is probably some of the most prolific that we've seen. I mean, we've seen, like, you know, there's certain different ones. We've seen Sam Little, you know, and because he claims that he committed, you know, hundreds across the country, and Ted Bundy obviously as well. But I think that this one, Dahmer, this one is just, I think the sheer fact of that, it seemed so solvable and went unsolvable, you know, went unsolved for so long. And what do you think? How do you think that happened? Like, that they went so long without being able to really kind of bring justice into this case, Kirk?
Well, it was a clear lack of evidence and or a lack of the capacity to analyze that evidence. I mean, DNA technology has moved forward leaps and bounds throughout the years, and we're talking 1970 something, right, that he began. And so, yeah, we're talking about a situation where they could do only the barest of what we would consider an archaic analysis of the suspect and things of that nature. So yeah, it makes sense to the degree, like, you know, Ted Bundy. I recently reread Ann Rule's book, and you know, she talks about how when he escaped from prison in Colorado, if he went to Florida, he probably would have got away with it, and justice never would have been served if he could have stopped, because he assumed an identity. There just wasn't that kind of script. I mean, he could get on a plane without ID or, you know, what have you, just because that was the times, and that was the development of the times. And it's just the technology. And we know this case was solved by genealogical DNA, and props to me for not screwing that word up. But you know,
I tried to not say that one.
Yeah, that was, you know, that kind of technology. That's new. That's within the last few years, right? So, I mean, as we see advancements, we're going to see, hopefully, the diminishment of these cases, because they will be solved and targeted much sooner.
Right. Now, I know that you worked as a death penalty defense attorney for a long time. How do you feel about this particular case? Because I know you've told us in the past that, you know, you're not extremely for the death penalty, that you believe that it's, you know, something that should be, you know, that should be abolished, you know, basically. So how do you, in this type of situation where it's so prolific like this, does that change your opinion at all?
No, not at all. You know, certainly if we were to have a death penalty, it would certainly be logical to understand how it would be placed on people like we've been talking about, like Ted Bundy or the Golden State Killer. But I still believe that the moral justification for murder just isn't there, whether it's us or the government, right? And I'm sure that there was a lot of people that are upset that this man didn't get the death penalty, but given the situation, you know, with the witnesses, the length of the trial, all that stuff, I think life imprisonment served everyone in this particular situation. And now my opinion just doesn't change, no matter, it's not a way to dismiss the horror that he caused, but I just don't think you solve anything by execution.
Sure.
And with the way his health has declined since the moment he was arrested till now, I don't know that he will live would live even through a trial. I mean, his health has declined huge amounts from the day they arrested him to they were at trial last week.
Well, yeah, and Brandy, you point out something I think is certainly a factor that probably motivated the prosecutor in this case to resolve it as they did, simply because not only the trial, and it's hard to imagine with these kind of, I know that the rapes, to my understanding, were outside of the statute of limitations in California, but they probably could have been brought in as evidence consistent with his modus operandi in terms of the murders, because they also included rapes. So when we're talking about a trial like that, you're talking about certainly a trial of significant length. When you talk about a death penalty trial, you add the length onto that, right? I mean, I always say in my career, the quickest death penalty case I ever had was a cold case, no victim's family, nothing, and it was 3 or 4 months still. So what this trial would have been well over a year. And the other thing, Brandy, I think that factors into this is the reality that on average, and people can take issue with this and say it shouldn't be like this, but it is that it takes about 15 years from day of sentence to the actual execution. So, I mean,
if you're lucky.
If he lives that long. So if we even talk about, let's say they started trial this year, right? It wouldn't be till 2035 when he was executed. Would he be alive in prison at 89 years old for execution?
Because he's 74 now, right? He's 74 now. So the likelihood of him even making it through a trial would have been, probably very slim to none. And in this sense, so explain what this does. So by him taking this plea, basically he waived his right to appeals, correct? Like that's what this does?
Yes.
Okay. And so, but here's my question, and this is kind of a very now thing. Like, so right now with COVID, they're looking at even violent offenders at 65 or older can apply to be, released. And he is in failing health, which even in a regular time period, there is a case to be made for them to be released because of failing health, correct? So do we think that may be something that we see happen in this case?
I would find that to be extremely shocking. I think some of the releases are, related to length of incarceration, already time served, likelihood of repetition, and there have been cases where you see, some violent offenders released, but I think a lot of that, most of that, because it doesn't make the headlines, it's the nonviolent offenders, and I don't think that would ever be brought up, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was even part of the plea agreement, but I couldn't even imagine that would happen in this case, that any judge would do that. I know people fear that and like to bring up that possibility, but I assume it's almost impossible.
And as his health declines, what does that mean for him being, kind of on without life without parole?
I don't know I mean, it could affect his classification within the prison system. I don't know how it works specifically in California, Arizona. There's an intake assessment. There's that sort of thing. He could be in a in a medical ward, that sort of thing. But I think the security around him will still be tight. And I don't, sometimes you wonder, is he really as frail as he appeared in court?
He appears.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
But,
so that's an act.
I should say that as a caveat to everything I'm saying, but would he appear much of an escape risk, that sort of thing. So depending on what the true assessment of his health is, he'll be classified according to that, and along with the nature of his crimes. And I'm sure, in California, it's the case with one of the reasons they separate death row inmates in Arizona is they have nothing left to lose, as it were.
Right.
So I'm sure he'll be segregated out in a way, hopefully that he can't harm anybody else should he have the inclination to do so.
Right, right. So someone was asking, would one crime cause him to be more excited than others? I would think so in that Rebel, because he's really a guy who evolved as time went on. He started off just doing burglaries and shoplifting, and then the rapes started. And we even see within inside of his own case, like he so the media made a statement, that he had never done anything inside of a home that had a dog or a male, when he was doing the raping before he started doing the murders. So the very next thing that he did was a home that had a male inside of it, so he was playing off of that and taunting with that and kind of looking like, oh, you think I'm not bad enough to do this? Well, let me go do that. So I definitely do think that there is a that there is something to be said for him being more excited by different things, and one crime would be more exciting for him than another, obviously. And as he, as they go through this, a lot of times they evolve, and change based on the fact that it's not enough anymore. And I mean, they're not sexually gratified by the actual act of rape, really. It's more about the power, especially in his case. He was absolutely about, power and intimidation. That's why he had them, go and tie up the husband, and he would put the thing of
The
dishes
plates.
on them. Yeah, the plates
Yeah.
on them, and tell them, if you move, I'll kill her. So it's and if you watch, there's a new documentary out. It's from, it's based off of Michelle McNamara's I'll Be Gone in the Dark. It's by the same name. They're putting it out on HBO. I've been watching that, and it is fascinating to hear from the victims as to what they really felt and how he really was with them inside the house, inside these things. And he took hours with them. Hours.
He took his time. He did. He wasn't rushed by any means with anything that he did.
Brandy, do you know, did he, or Kirk, if either one of you know, did he commit some of the murders in the same way that his sister was raped? I don't know if we have that information, but
I've never read that. I've heard it, but never read it, so I don't know.
Kirk, do you happen to know?
I think, Brandy, the one thing that's made obvious, and I would disagree a little bit. I think obviously in most cases, rape is more about power and control than sex. But I do think in this case, there was that twisted sexual element in there. That's what I think makes him unique. And I think, your question brings up a point that I hadn't thought about before, is that you mentioned the correlation to his sister's rape that he witnessed. Well, I think we could perhaps draw that correlation by the fact that he made the husbands or boyfriends of these women that he raped be a part of that, to partake in it, to be witnesses in that. And I think maybe there we could see at least a little bit of correlation of what that meant to him. I don't know, but I think we could see that correlation, that they were there perhaps to feel the same torment that he felt when he was a young boy watching his sister get raped.
Right. And we've talked about that in other cases, about how a lot of times in serials, especially, that what they're not killing the person in front of them or raping the person in front of them. They are a person that's kind of a placeholder for someone else, for whatever it is that they are acting out. We've seen that a lot in many of these cases, that it's an aggression towards someone else, or a feeling of loss towards someone else, or you did wrong, this person did me wrong, so I'm killing my mother over and over again, and we see that in a lot of these cases. So I can definitely see that, maybe like you're saying, there is a correlation there of him having to watch his sister, and that's why he's creating this. But I thought of something else, and then I completely lost it. Like, my brain is so fried today. I have been out all day long, and I was at a doctor's appointment today. So my brain is like, I might think of it again in a minute here, but it's fascinating to me, though, that he was just able to do this for so long, and then to stop. Like, that is interesting. Like, what makes you guys think that he was able to do that for so long? Or do you think he just did, and we haven't connected it?
Brandy, what do you think? You've researched a lot more than I have, I think.
That's one of the questions I don't think they've ever even come close to answering. I wonder if there was one where he was nearly busted that made him realize he was getting too old, maybe. And I do believe, didn't he move? I'm trying to think. Like, I'm like you, Fancy. My brain is so fried today.
Yeah.
And I just did another serial killer, so I'm trying to make sure I don't get them.
Right, exactly. We follow so many things, Yeah, BTK was similar to Ty. Yeah. And so we cover so many things that it's like, to keep all of them in my head straight, I have to compartmentalize myself. Like, okay, that's that guy over there. That's that guy over there.
Right. Well, and it's so weird to me that there are so many of them on the West Coast side of the country. It's like, what the heck is going on that side of our country that we have so many of these serial killers popping up?
Well, I also think that it's interesting that a lot of them, were in the 70s and 80s. Like 70s and 80s, you would think that it was people think of it as a safer time or a simpler time. No.
It really wasn't.
I think about it and I'm like, do you know how many serial killers there were active in 70s and 80s? And I wonder why. Do you think it's just that maybe we're able to identify them quicker now with the technology, Kirk, and that's why we don't see as many? Or is it just that was just a really prolific time for them?
Well, I think it's probably more a matter of knowledge, right? Like information. Back in the day, I mean, when I was a kid growing up, we had 3 news channels and about 7 channels, and you had to turn the dial yourself, right? You were getting information on the phone. There weren't, true crime communities and shows like this or anything like that, right? To spread the word. So if you didn't pay attention to it, you didn't know to be fearful, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? So I think they were every bit as prolific. There's another word that's tough.
Hey, you're doing good. 2 for 2.
2 for 2, yeah. Don't. Let's not push this now. But that's one of those things where I think we just have more knowledge and more awareness, and people pay more attention to these things now. And so, we've got TV channels dedicated to that, and HBO specials talking about Francie. So I think it's more awareness as opposed to more or less per se. I think it was easier to get away with, and maybe there was an opportunity more for people like Bundy and the Golden State to get away with it because of the lack of evidence and technology that we now have. So hopefully that means that when these people are beginning their path of destruction, that it's stopped sooner with the new technology and the information age.
Yeah, because we're covering right now on the podcast, The Good Wives Guide to True Crime, which you can find on any major platform, any of the podcast platforms that you listen to. We're diving in right now to the Oakland County child murders, same time period, 4 children that they know of, that were killed. And it was very interesting to me that in the MO of that killer, who has never been caught, never been brought to justice, was that they were almost taunting the police by placing the children. But it was also interesting to me that they were always firm. They talk about their clothes being pressed and very clean, and beyond just cleaning a body to get rid of any type of like evidence, they were like extremely pressed clothes, clean, crisp clothes that had been like, laid out for the children and kind of would be when they placed them, and then they would place them, in these specific areas. And so it was just very interesting to me to think about that in the same time period, and these little kids, they're walking to the store. One little girl was going to buy candy. She was 11, and I'm thinking, I would never let my 11-year-old do this. But in that time period, they did, and it was, so I guess maybe, like you said, maybe more access because people didn't realize, that things were so scary,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so does anybody else have any other questions for tonight? We will be continuing our investigation into this, looking at this, going deep into it. We'll be talking with Stephen David Lampley, who's a homicide detective that we have on, and we'll be talking with him about it. We're also in season 3 of our podcast. We're really going to dive deep into it. And I think Brandy's going to be covering it over when her channel, launches as well. So because she's done a lot of investigation into this. But it's such a strange case, and I was really surprised. I really didn't think that he was going to give it up, to be honest with you. Were you surprised at all, Kirk, or did you expect that? Or
you mean by give it up, you mean a plea agreement?
Yeah, and agreeing to talk about and admit that he had done all of this.
Well, I think there's a couple different ways to look at it. When I think of this from, like if I was going down as his attorney to talk to him in the situation and the death penalty,
Yeah,
and going through the evidence, I would be sitting there saying, look, and like I say, I don't have insight to it, but I suspect, and I feel like I'm on firm ground when I say I suspect that the evidence against him was pretty strong with the DNA.
Yeah, I would think.
Yeah.
I would think.
So
Right,
I'd be sitting there and saying, okay, look, you can go to trial and you can put these people through this, and you can put yourself through this and this degradation for months on end, and you're going to wind up in the electric chair, or however they do it in California, lethal injection probably. And or you can get at it and you can come clean and you could admit, and you're going to die in prison either way. So do you want to do it with a good, clean conscience, a cleaner conscience? Because you can't go back, right? When I know people can say, oh, he said clean conscience. No, I mean just clearing it up, coming out with it, telling the truth, and moving on and dying having at least told the truth, as opposed to keep denying it, that sort of thing. And that would be the tact I would take, because it is there is a reality. And I always say as an attorney, I don't know if many people do this or not, like whatever the outcome of the case is, you have to live with the consequences. I'm walking out of here and I'm going home. I'm not spending 15 years in jail, or I'm not facing lethal injection. So what do you want to do about it? How do you want to deal with this? And, maybe the fact that he stopped makes you wonder if there wasn't some sort of, awakening in his mind, or some kind of shift where maybe it was cathartic for him to come clean. We just really don't know. But obviously he made that choice for either for his own selfish purposes, or hopefully in another way to come clean and be a service.
Well, I mean, go ahead.
I was going to say, because you can see that somewhere at some point in time, this guy, like I say, is a Vietnam veteran. He was a cop. There must have been some good in there. And I know people might repulse to that, but that's why I say it's really interesting. How did that shift happen? Because you have this guy who would be considered admirable at the time and made that shift. So there's probably some good down there, or at least I'd like to hope so.
Right. And I think about, it's like, was it, like you said, a cleansing for him, or a clean slate for him? Or was it almost I get to finally claim what I did? Is it a gratification for him? Because a lot of them want that notoriety of, this is me. I did this. I was able to do this. And I was able to evade the cops for, however many years. I didn't get caught for all this. So I wonder if that played any part into it either.
It could have been that, but I wonder if that would have been the case, wouldn't he be on a media tour right now?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Talking to everybody like, hey, did you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah, like we're calling the local news and saying, look, I'm so-and-so, and I'm going to turn myself in, or what have you. Because that would have, that to me would have said, yeah, that's what he was looking for. And it's true, it might be, but it's notable that in that regard, he hasn't done any interviews that I'm aware of boasting about his activities, or his prolific nature, or evading the police, or any of that. Because we do see that, Francie, with cases. It comes to mind the Happy Face killer, whose name escapes me now, who wanted credit for his kills, and signed his little notes with a smiley face.
It's Jesperson, but I can't think of his first name.
Is it Richard Jesperson?
I think yes, maybe. I know his last name is Jesperson. Yeah. I know I've actually spoken with his daughter, Alyssa Jesperson Moore. And she, and I listened to, like you said, the Happy Face Killer podcast and everything, but I've spoken with her regarding some other things. But yeah, exactly. Like those ones that, have a moniker or a signature or whatever, that are kind of taunting the police, and that's one of the things in the case of the Oakland child, on Oakland County child murders. That was one of the things too. Like they put a mannequin to see if he would come back to where one of the bodies was found behind this dumpster. And they, dressed him just like the child and everything. Well, instead of coming back, what they found was on the day that, on a couple days after the funeral had happened, what was placed there was a card from the funeral home. And so indicating, hey, I was there. I wasn't here where you guys were watching for me. Yeah. I was actually at the funeral home, and several of the other ones, like the Zodiac, who sent things to, which we've still never completely 100%, identified. There's obviously cases for several different people in that one, but, where they're sending the media, types of, cryptic messages and things like that, taunting. So, well, guys, if you don't have anything else tonight for Kirk, we would love to, thank you, Kirk, for being on here with us, giving us some information. I know that somebody did ask about the electric chair. Rebel, Kirk doesn't believe that the death penalty should be at all. He thinks that it's inhumane, so he probably would not be a proponent for bringing back the electric chair. And me, as far as how I feel about the electric chair, I don't think that that's a humane way to take a person's life at all. So lethal injection is the one that I think is the most humane out of anything that we would do. I don't know how Brandy feels about it at all.
My viewpoint on the death penalty has changed over the last year. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I've always felt lethal injection would have been the way, because there was no sense in the electric chair is gruesome, and to me there was just no sense in that. Right. But I have looked into too many wrongfully convicted cases, and I can no longer, with a good conscience, support the death penalty when there are too many on death row that are innocent.
Sure. And I'm sure Kirk feels,
and that's taken me to a whole different look on it now. And I just, I mean, it makes me get very emotional thinking about the ones that have died already that were innocent and that are so close to being put to death, and they are so blatantly innocent.
Right. Well, and Kirk can speak a little bit about that. As a death penalty defense attorney, that was your whole job, was to keep them out of death penalty, correct? I mean, basically, it's not like you were really arguing defense as in they didn't do it. It was more of your client from being put to death. Yes?
Yeah. I touched on this a little bit last time, but that's job number one of a death penalty attorney. And more often than not, when a case is charged as a death penalty case, guilt is pretty much a foregone conclusion, whether it's through DNA or confession or something like that. That becomes the job really becomes to save a client's life. Now there's two ways to do that. One is to get a conviction on a lesser offense, because only first-degree murder in the United States is eligible for the death penalty. And the second way of doing that is through mitigation and sharing the client's life from conception to the time they are sentenced, so that the jury can make an informed decision. And that's what the U.S. Supreme Court said way back in, I want to say 76, when they brought the death penalty back, was this idea that in order to evade the Eighth Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, that the death penalty had to be, one, humanely applied. And we talked about that a little bit with the electric chair and the firing squads and the guillotines and some of the other methods that were employed in days gone by. And then also that it couldn't be for every first-degree murder. It had to be the worst of the worst. It had to be a select few. There had to be reasons. The sentencing had to be individualized is one of the big kickers, right? So, and I got this a lot during the Arias trial. Like, why do you bring these things up? Why does it matter? That doesn't matter. So-and-so's dead anyway, right? And that's completely true. But the U.S. Supreme Court says it has to be individualized. You have to take a look at the individual. It can't just be a rubber stamp on just you go straight to death because you killed somebody. So that's why that look is in there, and I think that's an important distinction when we just don't, in my view anyway, become just a society, a criminal justice system is solely based on vengeance.
Right. And my opinion on it has softened over time, especially like Brandy said, in this last year, we've looked at some of the same cases, especially Rodney Reed out of Texas was one of the main ones that we've looked at. Obviously, Darlie Routier, that are both sitting on death row that we think, have absolute in Rodney's case, I don't believe there's any question as to whether or not he was completely railroaded in that. And it was just a terrible miscarriage of justice, probably one of the worst ones we've seen. And then with Darlie, I mean, there's just so much question in that case as to whether she did or didn't, that I just can't see how they can put somebody to death when there is so much question,
Right. That's the thing with any kind of questions, death penalty should be off. I mean, it should be black and white proof, like saying we can take the Golden State Killer and we can look at him and say, okay, this is, there's 110% proof that you did this. Okay. But then they don't do that with these cases. And that's where the problem is.
Oh, I know what the other thing was. And I thought about this and maybe you won't know, Kirk, because you're not kind of into this part of it. But my other partner, Tori, brought up to me last night of that now, yes, DNA evidence, we've thought, okay, so DNA evidence is pretty much, the bar for, okay, it's absolute, right? This is done. But now they're finding that some of the DNA can be imparted from like a like Tori had like a horrible blood transfusion and different things like that. And they're wondering if that can somehow mix into your DNA and change things. And I don't know all the specifics of it, but it was something that she was bringing up of that there was that there had been some cases that they had come up with that there could be question based on some sort of thing like that. And it's really interesting to me. I haven't got to look into it yet. But I don't know if you've ever heard of anything like that.
Well, I'm by no means a DNA expert, and obviously it's been a few years since I've been practicing law. Thankfully,
right,
blissful few years, I might add. But ultimately, DNA has the common knowledge or common wisdom is that DNA is foolproof, but I don't think it is, and it can be tested wrong. Mixtures can happen. Things could happen. So there is no certitude. It's certainly more certain if done properly. And that's the biggest thing, if done properly, because look, when we're testing DNA, the people that are doing it are human beings, prone to mistakes, and mistakes can happen. And we see cases like that as well. So, it's certainly the best we can. And I hope moving forward, it gets even better, but it certainly is not the absolute 100% lock dead proof that I think everybody thinks it is.
Well, right. And we thought for the longest time that there was absolutely no way that fingerprints could be, duplicated or anything. But now it's coming out that there is a thought process that it is possible for more than one person. It's very unlikely. It's very rare, but for there to be more than one person that has the same fingerprint pattern. Now it would be almost unlikely that they would be in the same area at the same time. That the whole thing. You've got to think of it in that terms, but it's definitely something that's possible. So we have to be looking at that as well. When we're thinking about this. So times have changed, but as we progress, we find out that maybe things aren't as concrete as we thought they were even just a couple years ago. And I think about the case where it's a Netflix special right now, and the name, maybe it's The Pharmacist. No, that's not the one. Is it a drug scandal? It's one of the ones where the analyst was literally like ripping open packages and doing things and trying to like impress her superiors, and so she was contaminating things and still like going ahead and processing them the way that they wanted them to be processed. So now they had to reopen all those cases, and I can't for the life of me think of what it is, but it was a big thing, a big scandal, and they made a Netflix documentary out of it that's very current. I don't know if Brandy, if you know what I'm talking about.
No, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, I happened to follow across it just a couple nights ago, and I was like, well, that's really interesting. And I got kind of down the rabbit hole on it. It was crazy. Yeah, so there's that. But anyway, I mean, thank you so much for giving us some information on this case, Kirk, and kind of giving us an inside look at how, a defense attorney looks at it and what you're thinking when, they're trying these types of things. If leaving us with the last thing, is there anything that you personally, if this had been your case, you would have done differently, or maybe that they didn't do that you would be like, wow, I'm surprised that didn't happen?
No, I think, the attorneys in this case, obviously not knowing what the discussions were internally, I would have been looking at that evidence and looking at the certitude of it and talking to my client, and probably, if he was willing to admit to it, I'd be looking to get out of there with the plea deal as well, because, one, it's not gonna go well for the attorneys, and the whole process. Could you imagine if that was broadcast on TV? The kind of harassment and everything they would go through.
Frenzy.
Right, and what their lives would go through, and what everybody's life would go through in that situation. So, believe me, if that case was in hand and guilt was so certain, with what we said earlier, keeping that goal in mind of saving life, looking to do that in a way that spared everybody a trial would certainly be the goal, and those attorneys certainly accomplished that goal rather swimmingly.
Yeah, because this would have been.
You think about it. I mean, even a case like that where he pleads out, or James Holmes, the Colorado shooter, where he pled out, those cases are in terms of true crime or social media or actual media, traditional media, I should say. Those were blips in the radar compared to the cases that go to trial, like Miss Arias or Casey Anthony. Those get all the attention because there's all that drama in there. And so, I think everybody is well served by this kind of outcome. And I would certainly applaud the attorneys for their work on this case. All of them, the prosecutor as well.
Yeah. Prosecutors. And it's funny you mentioned Casey Anthony. We're actually having
visible reaction to your face, Francie, when I said that name.
Yeah. Well, it's really funny because you brought that. Well, I have my own thought process on it, let me tell you, like I think everybody does. But, and I don't have opinions. I'm never opinionated, but no.
Yeah.
But
okay. Don't lie to nobody here.
But it's funny because we're actually covering that case here Friday night with live with Trisha Arrington from Web Sleuths, because Web Sleuths. Yeah, she's a sweetheart. Web Sleuths had a lot to do with, following that case when it was breaking, and going through and everything. So she's coming on Friday night to discuss that. And we will be going into depth on that later on this year, in that case, and kind of covering it more as to exactly what happened. Because a lot of times people in that case, I think they don't understand how she ended up where she ended up and getting off, and we may have to have you come back at some point and explain the law side of that. Yeah, I would love for you to come back and talk about that. Maybe that's the next one we'll have.
Aren't I in enough trouble having the associated with Jodi Arias? Now you want to associate me with Casey?
Well, Kirk, I aim to please. No, just kidding. We definitely
I think you deserve like a gold medal.
Yeah. We're definitely going to have you come back and really talk a lot about the Jodi Arias case and what you went through with that. But yeah, I would love to hear some of your thoughts on Casey. So maybe we will, tap on you and see if you'll be willing to come back and talk with us about that too. But
he's like, gee, thanks.
We'll see. Hold on. I think I'm busy that day, Francie.
He's like, I'm gonna block you on Facebook now. That's what I'm doing right
He's
now.
Gonna wash his hair that day.
Every day for the next year. But anyway, we thank you so much for joining us tonight, guys. If you have more questions for Kirk or things that you would like to hear for his opinion on other cases, let us know either in the comments, or you can send us an email at goodwivesdish@gmail.com, and that way we will be able to ask you more questions going forward. But thank you all for joining us tonight on this special event. Thank you, Brandy, for stepping in tonight since Colleen was just unable to. And
you're
Kirk
welcome.
for joining
I'm
us.
sorry I wasn't up to par.
That's okay. It's okay. You know, I understand. So, but everybody, thank you very much.
In case the listeners are wondering, I've had no AC in 106-degree weather. It has been fun. Just saying.
I had that happen to me one year in California, and I was pregnant. I was like 8 months pregnant or whatever when it went out. And I was like, I told my husband, I'm like, if somebody does not get out here today, I'm murdering people. Like,
if I would have had that issue and been pregnant, somebody would have died. I'm just saying, I would have needed an attorney because somebody would have died.
You would have needed Kirk. You would have needed Kirk. But anyway, thank you all for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday night, and come back and see us again on Friday when we'll have Trisha Arrington from Web Sleuth. So that's going to be a really fun one. So, all right, guys, have a good night. Bye.
Bye, guys.